Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Curtain. I'm your host, Mohamed Saleh, and with me is my co-host, John Dyer. And today we're going to talk about the domain of change, but specifically is around when we start doing change in organizations. And I'm sure all of you, either as operators, have been doing change, or as practitioners have leading and supported change. You run into some roadblocks or resistance as you go through these changes. And today we're going to just highlight some of these factors that we've seen in organizations of why people, why organizations, why some external factors cause these kind of change resistance to happen. And we'll have many more episodes that dive deeper into some of these other elements as well. And so, John, why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about what are some of the factors that you see with resistance to change?
Okay. Well, first of all, this is a critically important topic, right? Because, this is all under the umbrella of making improvement happen, whether we call it lean or team-based improvement or, whatever we want to call it, is making improvement happen. Well, you can't improve something if you don't change something. Right? You can't just wish it to get better. Something has to change.
Yep.
Whether it's the tooling, the material, the process, the technology, something's got to change.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is a tremendous resistance to change, then nothing is ever going to get any better. And you probably have heard those old sayings of, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
Or we tried changing 10 years ago and it didn't work, so we don't want to change now. One of the things that was kind of interesting, when I was at General Electric, this was many years ago, early in my career, I got the opportunity to go around collecting best practices from several different companies that were on the very leading edge of making improvement happen. We didn't call it lean back then. TQM was just kind of getting off the ground, total quality management. So this was back in the earliest days. But one of the things that really struck me visiting several of these manufacturing plants that were doing well in their improvement efforts, even without all of the books and guidelines and training courses, was that whenever I would talk to the employees, especially those that were on the front lines, they would tell me that they actually embraced change. In fact, and this really hit me. In fact, several of them would say things like, if we are not changing, then that's a bad thing because that means we're becoming complacent, which means that our competition is going to pass us up, and then ultimately we're going to lose our jobs. So they actually saw change as progress, change as, moving the ball forward towards reaching excellence and achieving satisfaction with their customers. So that really hit me early in my career, but it also hit me how many ways and reasons why people resist change. In fact, I would call these blockers, right? Blockers of change. Why do people block change? There's several reasons, and these are the things we'll dive into in future episodes. But one of the techniques I like to use to kind of make this point in my training class, it's a really simple activity. I ask all the participants to cross their arms, right? To just cross their arms. And then I asked them to recross their arms, but this time to put the one that was on the bottom up on the top. And then after about 5 seconds, I say, okay, you can stop now. And almost 100% of the time, as soon as I say you can stop now, everybody in the class will either drop their arms or immediately go back to the first way of doing it. And I ask him, I'm like, hey, why did that happen? And there's always, a little bit of laughter and chuckles. And it's like, well, it was so uncomfortable. The other way was uncomfortable. So we like to be in our comfort zone. So we immediately go back to what we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And then I share that I've been doing this activity for so long that I've now forgotten which arm is supposed to be on top, because I'm equally comfortable both ways. But it took a while to get there.
Yeah.
And that's the point of change, is that, yeah, it's uncomfortable. And people are out, are not sure what to do, how to do it. And it says that you have to do something, and repeat it many, many times before it starts to become a habit, before it starts to really get ingrained. And during that time of relearning what to do, that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. As I think of like my own situations when I resistance change, because there has been times where change was subjected to me, and it was hard for me to accept it, and I've done many transformations in organizations that I have seen pushback. There's some factors that like stand out to me, and there's a lot actually, but I'm probably just gonna, for the sake of time today, just highlight four. But one of them, I have a really interesting story behind it. The first factor that I'm noticing when I move from industry to industry or from site to site or company to company is that there needs to be an acknowledgement sometimes that this company is in a state of innovative fatigue. There has been so much work overload on the individuals to the point that they are just burnt out and emotionally exhausted. It's not that they don't want your change. They're just exhausted
Right.
and burnt
Yep.
out. And so the best way to not have another thing that they have to now do is to block you. So I think that's a factor that needs to be acknowledged. And I suggest any practitioner who's causing change or leading change to understand the context of how much innovative fatigue has been subjected to these individuals. So that's one. The second one, and you've highlighted this in other episodes as well, so I'm just going to come back to it, is a loss of control. They know the status quo. And it could be power, and it could be knowledge, but it's a loss of control in both situations. And so here you come, introducing the unknown. That could take away my power, or that could take away the knowledge, and now I'm no different of an expert than anyone else, and I'm kind of reset again. Why do I want that? And so I would say that's another factor that I see a lot. The other one is really hard, or was really hard initially in my career to appreciate. But when I first started, and I'm not suggesting anyone do this, but I'm just saying it's my current state. When I first started my career, my sensei used to call me a concrete head. So do not call people concrete head. But it took me a while to understand why he used to call me a concrete head. And Japanese people have an interesting way of teaching you. And it was a man of few words. And it wasn't until almost, I want to say 15 years later, that I ran into another individual that I hired on my team, and he said that his sensei used to call him a concrete head, and we realized we had the same teacher. And he had a little bit of an advantage for me because in his company, he used to kind of orchestrate his contract and was the one that got him from the airport. So they had a more intimate relationship than I had with that individual. And I asked him, like, weren't you offended by that? He's like, of course. He was like, until I understood what he meant by it. I was like, well, he never explained to me what he meant by it. And I spent my entire career with this mindset of being flexible because he used to call me a concrete head. And I was like, I'm not a concrete head. So like, I'm going to be understanding and I'm going to get consensus and I'm going to be flexible. And because I thought that's what he meant by it. And he was like, no, that's not what he meant by it. He said, the human head has 3 layers when it comes to change. And the first layer that you run into, or you like butt heads with is people's uh, ego. And so, so when you're telling someone they need to change, sometimes they personalize that means they are not doing a good job. And so there's an ego that will come out that will say, like, no, I am doing a good job, and the block happens. And so you have to find a way to make sure there's sufficient reward to that individual so that you could overcome the ego. And then once you're able to penetrate through that layer, you run into a bigger layer, and that layer is called pride.
Right.
And the pride layer is that, you're saying this department is horrible. All right, and we need to make some changes here. Well, you just insulted a whole group of people. Like, it's one thing if you call me ugly or call me bad. It's another thing when you call my family. And so like now I have this pride that I have to stick up for, and I feel like I'm this heroic person says my team is doing a great job. But the approach of saying you need to change as a team sometimes is introduced in a very diminishing way that takes that pride, or takes that, you throw out that baby with the bathwater. You don't acknowledge all the great things they have done to get where they are today. You just dismissed all of that and said, we need to start over. And so people have to understand there's a layer called pride, and that's a layer that most individuals don't take the time to appreciate all the good they've done and acknowledge that, and then use that momentum to get traction and move forward, rather than they come in and say, what, this value stream is horrible. We need to transform it because you guys are not meeting the metrics.
Right.
Okay, you just threw out the baby with the bathwater. And then the third layer is that you need to understand that this person has preconceptions and beliefs that you have to move and change, and knowledge that you have to change. They learned certain things, like they learned by being on the floor that's micromanaging. And so now they're management oversight rather than management on-site. And now you're coming to teach them that management on-site at the Gimba is the right thing to do when they were taught that they shouldn't be on the floor because that's micromanaging. And so so you're changing people's belief system. And that's another layer of change. So in each one of those 3 layers, there has to be sufficient reward and acknowledgement of what they know before you ask for change.
Just real quick,
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is that whenever I do training for lean, one of the things that I like to do is basically set up a process simulation.
Yeah.
And it's like, let's experiencing a bad process and then have the people work on improving that to come up with a new, better process. What's interesting about that approach is that, of course, at the end of that exercise, you reflect back and say, look how much progress you were able to make. Look how much better the process has become because of the improvements that you did on this fictitious simulated process. How could that be applied to your own process? So, talking about the 3 layers, I love that analogy. Doing it that way bypasses the first 2 layers because you're not talking about their process up front.
Yeah.
You're not demonizing what they're currently doing. You're not hitting the ego or the pride. You're going directly to that 3rd layer by saying, hey, let's go through this simulation. And can we all agree that this first round is horrible, poorly designed. Everybody hates working in it. And can we all agree that you, the class, did an amazing job of improving from what it was to what it is?
Yeah.
And can we all agree that we'd be much better off in that second scenario? And everybody's like, oh yeah, absolutely, oh, absolutely. And then as the instructor, you go into, okay, how could this same knowledge be applied to what you're currently experiencing?
Yeah.
Are you closer to that first round or closer to that second round? And
Yeah.
more than likely, it'll be, well, actually, we're probably closer to that first round.
Yeah.
So that way you can get people's thought process to change without the barriers of ego and pride
Coming
going
up.
up.
Yeah. And so when he used to call me a concrete head, all he was saying is that you're not building trust. You're not, there's insufficient reward in your methodology of how you're subjecting change. And I find that to be a huge factor, because I've been guilty of that, of coming in and saying, you guys need to change your, the check-in process is really bad, or the triage process is really bad, or the receiving process is really bad. Well, what I just did is sometimes is I just, called their baby ugly. And we know how that goes. And then worse, that's the pride one, is I'm throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And so I'm not even acknowledging that there's any good here. And so I want to say that that is one that I had struggled with and I had to overcome and understand. And now I spend time at the Gimba long enough to build relationships, long enough to understand what good they're doing. I seek the goodness in what people are doing, and then I recognize it. I recognize what the team has accomplished and got them where they are today. And then I use something like your simulation to figure out, how do I just start changing the belief system? But a lot of us don't even take the time to learn what do they know. We just assume they don't know any of this and I'm going to teach them everything. Well, maybe half of that stuff they already know. The last one, and this is something I feel personally, is when you go through change, there's the norming, storming, like those phases that we had talked about in a prior episode. Well, every time you subject a new player, you reset.
Right.
And I'm a big community guy. I like the pride. I like to be part of a team. I like to see us all win. I like to help support one another. And so if a change comes that breaks that dynamic, there could be a break in community at that point. And I see that as a threat sometimes, as a receiver. And so I just want you to know, as you go through this, changes, some people might block you because your change could break their community. And you need to be mindful of that there's a community that's established that you're disrupting. And so get to understand the community before you make those changes.
Yeah, I have an example of that. And again, this was way early in my career when I was just getting started with all this. And all we wanted to do was move a particular workstation about 15 feet in order to improve the flow of the material. Now, of course, we did it the wrong way. We just waited till, everybody went home at the end of second shift, and we moved the workstation. So when the first shift people came back in, it was all set up, and we just thought they would naturally understand that, oh, this flows so much better. And this, you're saving a whole bunch of steps, and, and the chaos is going to be a lot less. Well, the person who worked at that workstation had a complete meltdown. I mean, just furious. And so, of course, I was the one that got elected to go out and talk to her. And I'm trying to understand. I'm like, she was literally throwing stuff and, yelling. And I mean, and after she calmed down a little bit, I'm like, what? Help me understand. What's wrong with this? Isn't this so much better? I mean, look at how much better everything is flowing, and you don't have to walk as far, and your job's going to be 10 times easier. And she said, you don't understand. My best friend works in the station over there where I used to be, and now I can't talk to her. I'm 15 feet away from her, and that's how we pass the time during the day, and now I can't do that. So you've ruined my life. And yeah,
So the community. Like
Yeah, right.
yeah.
I disrupted the community, and boy, that was an early lesson in my career, how important it was to understand, to basically stand in people's shoes and
Yeah.
understand their perspective on things, and get and feel their feelings in order to incorporate that into the process of getting them to buy in.
Yeah. You just as you were talking right now, there's another blocker of change, and this is rare. I'm sure no one has this problem. Um, but sometimes the change that occurs doesn't understand the reality. And there's this absence of fairness that sometimes happens where the top thinks they understand the front line, makes a change that is not reflective of reality at all. And there was no empowerment or engagement from the front line to feed that decision making. And I would say that is another type of blockers, or resistant to change, is that, do you understand what you're asking me to do? Okay,
Right.
makes no sense.
See,
Uh,
I think that's the root of all of this, really. And we're about out of time, but just to kind of summarize all of this, is change being thrust upon someone, or are they involved in the change so that they take ownership, and then that allows them to have pride of workmanship,
Absolutely.
because when it does get improved, when it does get better, they can share in that celebration to say, hey, look what my team did, look what I was a part of, versus the change, being thrust. All of us are that way, right? If somebody wants to come into our domain and tell us to do something different, immediately the walls go up, and
Absolutely.
and we'll figure out a way to make sure it fails. So when it does fail, you can go back to the way it used to be and back into my comfort zone.
Yep.
So that's the bottom line to all this. And this is what we'll be talking about in future episodes. How do you get people won over? How do you get them to buy into the change? How do you get them to develop that ownership? And then, boy, once you have achieved that and it's successful, nobody will want to go back because it's
So,
theirs.
as we're closing here, we highlighted empowerment and the critical need for empowerment in this journey. Make it their journey, not your journey. Acknowledge that there's an ego and a pride and a knowledge that you have to shift in this, and most importantly, know that there is a disruption that you're causing, and that it could be a power disruption, and need to understand what that power disruption is, or a community disruption. And you need to understand that. And if you go into it with a understanding of the current state, the future state, I think, will be huge. And finally, as we come to a close, remember there is innovative fatigue, and that's real. And organizations are sometimes burnt out, and be mindful of that. It's not you that they're against. It's the fact that they've been doing so much and they're exhausted and burnt out. And you'll get some cynicism, but hey, that's part of the journey. Maybe you need to do little baby steps so that they could get back their energy and actually move forward. All right, we'll talk about all of those in more details in future episodes. All right, John, this was a great episode.
All right.
Take care.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.